Hello to my dear listener. Happy New Year. Whoever you are, I wish this year that wherever you are and whatever you do it with love. Because if you do so, success is yours. And that is the case for our guests here at the Entrepreneur's Road. Let me start by saying I'm so glad you are starting the year with me because today we have a special 2-part series episode featuring Daniel Kivatinos, the founder of DrChrono, that its successful exit marked a significant win for Y Combinator, placing them among the top 1% exits alongside companies like Cruise, Twitch, Reddit, and others. Daniel's entrepreneurial journey began working in a startup with limited funding, which ultimately failed. Next step for him was working at another startup, this time with a lot of funding, but unfortunately, that startup failed too, which led to his layoff. Constantly questioning how he would do things differently, Daniel yearned for autonomy and the freedom to implement his own ideas. That's when he started DrChrono, a platform that revolutionized medical record management and patient care. Daniel has consistently demonstrated that innovation and timing are key to success, which we will delve deeper into how entrepreneurs can identify and capitalize on timely opportunities. Today, Daniel once again is seizing the opportunity with his new startup, JustPaid.io, an AI-powered revenue collection platform for companies. In the first part of our series, we delve into Daniel's initial struggles and the birth of DrChrono, highlighting lessons crucial for any budding entrepreneur. The second part focuses on his current venture, offering practical insights for listeners aiming to harness AI in their business strategies, delving deeper into the challenges of entrepreneurship and the future of AI. Let's get started. Welcome to the show, Daniel. It's so fantastic to have you here today. You've had quite a journey with, am I pronouncing it right, DrChrono?
Yes,
DrChrono.
Yes, you are.
To your new venture at JustPaid.io. So I'm really excited to dive into all these amazing journeys and learn about your innovative work now. So I want to always start on a fun note. How does that sound to you?
Sounds great.
Great. So have you watched the movie Matrix?
Years ago. I love that movie.
Okay, so there is this part where characters can instantly learn new skills through some uploads in their head. So I want to ask you, if you had the chance to instantly acquire a new skill or a piece of knowledge and go really deep into something, what would it be and why?
That's a really good question. I think understanding the best entrepreneurs in the world and seeing how they're able to scale at mass. So really getting into their head and understanding how they're able to operate. And this goes for like musicians. How are you able to operate at such a high level without burnout? And the skills like that. There's a bunch of it sounds so silly. I was looking at this one musician and I really respect this musician. And he has a winery, he has 3 bands, and he's world famous. And I'm like, how do you manage your time when you have a family and you have all of these things going on? He owns multiple businesses. If you look at even Kim Kardashian, it's how does she do it? Really manage all of that massive infrastructure and still not burn out and generally enjoy life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So maybe they really love journey of being a entrepreneur and all those burnout. Maybe it's not burnout to them. Maybe it's just they're really loving the journey.
Right. And there's a regimented they don't talk about it, but there's this regimented life that they have that I'm trying to understand myself so I can help my new company scale and also have those same like enjoyable moments, right? I mean, even you look at just some of the best founders in the world that have like large public companies. NVIDIA, like the founder, right? He's still there.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's a part of him that like loves it. I see it. I look at the founders and I'm like, he really genuinely loves what he does. You know, there's some crazy, watching a talk from the founder of NVIDIA, and he has, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 direct reports, people that like report directly to him. And I'm like, it's probably more than that. I forget what happened in the interview, but I'm like, he said something really insightful. Like, these people are so self-driven that like he doesn't have to manage them so well. And I'm like, he was able to scale NVIDIA to such a huge level. And he looks like he's in great shape. He looks like he's living life.
Yeah.
I mean, of course he's stressed out. He actually, the thing that I really respect about him is he's humble and he understands like failure is right around the corner for NVIDIA if he doesn't work hard. And I think that's another thing that I really respect about some of these people that are like, hugely successful. They understand how easy it is to come and go. I mean, sure, he'll be wealthy for the rest of his life, but his company would be hurting if he doesn't like build the next AI chip, right? He probably has thousands of people like working on these AI chips.
Maybe we watched the same interview from him, but like exactly, what do you mean by regiment life?
I don't know myself because I'm not at the scale at like what they're at, but I see that this like regimented life where all of these successful people have a certain way of living that allows them to do multiple things, have multiple things going on. And I'm always analyzing like the most successful people. And that's where I'm like, if I was in the Matrix, how do I download those processes? Like, take the top 50 entrepreneurs and how do you upload that into your head and really get into their head? Because these people are operating multi-billion-dollar companies. How do they not fall apart? Like, how did they structure their business appropriately? How do they structure their day where they're able to like scale the business without them doing all of the work?
Well, I think you did with DrChrono. It is scaled pretty large with 17.8 million patients using it and facilitating booking of 69 million appointments and 11 billion of medical billings. So I mean, I feel like it's already in your head.
Yeah.
Like how you can scale and all of that. But you were among also like top 1% exits from YC.
Yeah. Yep. That's right. I guess what part of my success is always questioning myself and like, what is better than that? If that makes sense. Like, some people might be happy with whatever's in your head, right? But what is better than that? I think there's a competitiveness that, like, I'd say a lot of entrepreneurs have that you see, and I think that that's where that maybe comes from. There's this like underlying subconscious competitiveness from all the entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. I feel like they're all fighting a good fight. They really want to do good work. But, you know, for me, yes, I scaled that business and it became hugely successful. But even in the process of building it, and while it was successful, I always felt like there was more to do, if that makes sense. And, you know, what does it look like? What does more look like? What is that? Like, how do you build big businesses that are sustainable for like decades, right? I mean, that's where when a founder leaves a company, you really see like if the company has a good culture, if there's like a good team in place, if there's a good methodology in place. You know, everybody talks about Steve Jobs. What I liked what he said when Walter Isaacson, like years ago, was writing a book about him. You know, Steve was asking Steve Jobs, like, what was your most proudest product? And he, you know, he didn't say the iPhone. He didn't say the iPad. He said the Mac. It wasn't that. He said it was the people that were there that created the creative products make that company amazing. And for me, I'm like, he built a team that could last for a long time doing amazing things. Yes, it's a big organization. Yes, all that. But I do think that there's something there that makes them nimble and smart and creative, and the best people want to work there. And when you're there, you know you're making an impact in the world. Mm-hmm. But easy come, easy go. If you don't have that culture and like a founder leaves,
exactly,
a company just kind of falls apart. But like, yeah, sorry, I'm kind of like deviating from your question a lot. But
no, I mean, that's why I always ask about culture in the end of my podcast from all the founders, because culture is so important. And founders need to like really develop their leadership skills, really make a company that everyone is collaborating and setting it up for success for future people. So I absolutely agree with everything you said. And we're going to go to the discussion of culture for sure. But I took a lot of polls this time from like in various founder group that I'm part of. And it was like, you know, Daniel is coming and this is all his experiences. So everyone is actually really excited. And so these questions are all from my audience and I'm really excited to dive into them. Before we start with all those questions, really quickly, I would love to know a little about like where you grew up and your childhood, and then we're going to start from there.
Yeah, so I grew up, the word blue collar, I grew up in a blue collar home where my dad, he worked for the New York City Housing Authority, which was it was an interesting place because New York was like, there was always a hustle and bustle in New York. And, you know, I don't think it was a wealthy family. It was more just government-based job that my dad had. We relied on him. But lived on the outskirts of New York City, so it wasn't quite in the city. So it was like I always would go into the city and see what he did and saw the hustle and bustle of the city. My mom had, she was a artist, so she actually created dolls for a while, like Barbie, those sorts of dolls.
Cute. Wow.
Yeah, and that for me was like a really creative thing because she would do all of these interesting projects. Like she did stained glass and she did all these like she did sewing. Like she was kind of like a jack of all trades, just doing like jobs. But she did have a corporate job. Like she worked as a teller at a bank. And then my dad worked in the government. Basically, he worked on elevators all day. So there's actually people that do that. It's such an odd thing to mention, but there are people that literally fix the elevators all day for people.
Wow.
And my dad would go climb up in the shafts of the elevators. It was actually really scary.
Yeah.
He'd climb into these shafts, and I just remember being like looking at him like pulling parts off elevators while they were like moving.
Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of unreal.
Wow.
But, you know, I think
it's incredible.
Growing up in that environment, like you realize how important elevators are and like all the parts go into it. So he would work for low income families that like were in these tall buildings. And I remember this one time I went into this building with my father, and we probably walked an hour up to the top of the building. So like when the elevator is broken, it's broken. So
wow.
Basically most of his day was like, how do I bring parts to the top of a building?
Yeah.
Without an elevator. So we would just walk up, you know, those circle stairs, you just walk up and up and up. And then we'd get to the top and he would just honestly look around. It almost looked like a car engine, and he would just figure out what car parts it needed. And I remember like how important like it was for like the people in the building, because a lot of them were elderly.
Yes.
You know, it was like actually an important job, and I realized the stress he was under because he had to fix it fast. You know, you have thousands of people living in these buildings, and like if 4 elevators break at the same time, you're not in a good spot. That's
from personal experience. I'm not a senior citizen, but like I have a little like back problem. So basically it's very hard for me. I live on 3rd floor, and sometimes our elevator goes out and I'm like, oh my God, like how am I going to go grocery shopping?
Yeah.
Just want to like take a moment and thank, you know, the people that works on elevators and make it work for us. Like
Yeah.
it's crazy how many people would suffer if there was
Yeah.
no elevators.
Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you so much for telling us a little about your childhood. So let's just start about your journey with DrChrono. So how did that start?
Yeah. So, I mean, everybody goes through school and they kind of think like there's this like really great job. At least this is what I thought. Like my parents put me through college. Yes, I took on some debt and it was, it was really rough in college, but I think, going through the college experience, I thought that there was like this perfect job for me, right? Like, oh, I just graduated. I'm going to find the right job and it'll be great. And, I did kind of hop around in college also. Like I did art at first, then I did psychology. Then I hit upon computer science and I thought it was really challenging. So I kind of just hopped around. I had a liberal arts degree, then I got a psychology degree and a computer science degree, then a master's degree. I was going to go for my PhD. And I just remember thinking, let me just experience the world a little bit before I do that, because that's a huge commitment. And I would see the PhDs and they would in these computer labs going for their like computer science degrees, and something was off about that experience for me. I just felt like academia didn't have the meaning I wanted, so I needed to like wait to get my PhD. Anyway, I went out and started to look for a job, applied to lots of jobs, and just got rejected time and time again. Didn't interview well, was not good at it. I'd also freeze up. I was actually really horrible at tests. So like, if someone put a test in front of me, I'd be like, this isn't the job for me. So the test really like would turn me off. And then one day I went into this one startup, and it was in New York City. And startups were not cool back when I was like, this is 2004, 2005. People were not doing startups back then. Anyway, go into this startup, and I don't know why, but one of the technical guy who was doing all of the servers, coding everything, he just liked me for some reason. He's like, this guy feels like a good fit for like our startup. And my plan was not to go into startups. My plan was to get a job, right? A job where I could like support myself and make a living. And, the big corporate companies just didn't like the way that I was, I would say. Maybe I wasn't like what fit their profile. But somehow the startup community felt like I was a good fit. So the guys
what was that between like the corporates and the startups?
Yeah, I mean there was a lot of like things that were off about me. First of all, I was a musician. Also, so I had really long hair. In 2004, long hair was not in.
Really? I think long hair is always cool for guys. I don't know.
When you're interviewing it like Bloomberg, and it's a corporate financial technology company, they were just like, this guy doesn't seem like the right fit because I wasn't wearing business shoes. Like I remember like if you weren't like dressed exactly the way that they wanted, that influenced their decision.
That's actually sad in my opinion. Yeah,
I mean, that's the way that the world worked.
Yeah, I think like today even it works sometimes like that. Yeah. But I think it's like, look at what talents they lost.
Yeah.
So, and there is like so many people that they have artistic side. I don't understand why corporates not accept the other parts of their employees.
I mean, that was just probably one of the things that were off about me was my long hair, the way that I dressed. I remember going to Microsoft. And this is back several years ago. They flew me to their head HQ, and I'm like, oh my God, it's Microsoft. This is like the big time. Like, I gotta not screw this up, right? I need to like get in there and like, this is like where things happen. And, I just remember being like really put off by the interview because like what they were asking me had no meaning.
What was that?
they had a big whiteboard. Whiteboards are great. I actually like the whiteboard, but they were like, if you have a bridge and you can't cross the bridge, like, and then they had this like answer that they were looking for that was like exactly what they needed from me. And I just was like, what's the point of like, if you want to know exactly the answer you want, like you're asking me to do software development. Can we just like get to the computer and do the software development and not talk about whiteboard analogies?
That's interesting.
And I think they got that vibe from me. Because I'm like, let me show you what I can do on the computer and not on a whiteboard, because if you're going to make me do all this whiteboard work, you just have a bunch of people with whiteboards everywhere. I love whiteboards. I just like the questions they were asking were so out of left field. And I just remember thinking, if I ever started a company, I'm going to make everybody code in front of me, and that'll be the test. Because that's what they were looking for, but instead they were kind of beating around the bush. Like
they wanted like one specific like the answer in their head, which is like it's. I interviewed Alex Budak book. It's called like Being a Change Maker, and it was talking about like how leadership can be like you tell your employee what is the goal and exactly like make it super specific. For example, we sell 500 of this. Let them do the how. So the what, make it clear for them, but the how, let them make their own creative choice on how to get there.
Right.
And trust them, which is then comes with not micromanaging.
Right.
But okay, very cool. And then what happened from there?
Yeah, I mean, it was a slew of those interviews, right? Then, those that were kind of off. And then, I think what I liked about the startup, and maybe this is why I got hired at a startup, was I felt like I could make an impact. It was one guy running a whole entire startup. That was it. And I'm like, I feel like even if I do like a minimal amount of work, it is like exponential in a startup versus like you don't get that feeling at like a larger company. And I think that really like excited me, where I was like, this guy needs me because if I help him, oh my God, it's going to be like an exciting ride, because like, every little thing I do like will make an impact. And, I think he felt that in the interview with me, but he also liked my quirkiness. He was like looking at my shoes. They were not like, I don't know what I was thinking. I was wearing the wrong shoes, but he liked it. Like for the first time, someone was like clicking, and I'm like, all right, this is someplace I kind of fit with this person. And I could learn from him because he has a PhD in computer science, and like maybe he'll teach me a thing or two about like how to run a company. And I think that really like we both connected on that level. And the job, another thing was it wasn't about the money for me. It wasn't about the money. I took the job, like it could have been half the salary, and I would have just been like, yes, let's do it. So, he kind of threw a number out there. I was like, that sounds great. I'll be there when you need me. And, he's like 8 a.m. next week, come into the office.
Yeah, it's really crazy how many people would actually, for a work with a purpose, with something that resonates with them, they're happy to lower the salary. There was a study done that showed people are willing to lower their salary by 23% to get a job that is meaningful, which reminds me of that. So how did that get into the DrChrono?
I mean, at that first startup, I really learned a lot because, one, I had to actually run all the Ethernet cables in our office. I remember just literally climbing into the ceiling and like running Ethernet.
What's
as we would
Ethernet?
Just those cords, the cords in your wall, you plug it in, not the Wi-Fi stuff, but the ether, like I had to run the whole network for like the whole office, which was really nice. Yeah, that was kind of like it went from that to like actually running the database to like coding, and then but. What was interesting about that company was I feel like it was too early for its time. That's okay. But I mean, what I mean by that is like they had an idea, which is basically YouTube, Udemy, Udacity, like all the MOOCs, massive online courses. it was 2004. I just don't think people were ready. Also, like, it was just the model wasn't quite right, like the pricing model and all of that, and people just didn't go online really to like learn like they do now. Now it's just like a thing. It's just like, if I need to learn something, let me go online. It was not, that thinking was not really there in 2004. So the company really struggled, and I felt like, you know, people were leaving, and it just, the culture was not working, and it was a stressful environment. And in that process, I remember thinking they never had enough engineers. Like, if they really wanted to have a go of it, you have to have it like more than like a couple of people. Like, why would you have 12 people in a company and 2 engineers for a software startup? Right? Mm-hmm. Like, that for 100%. Me was a big, I just was like, why wouldn't you have more people like working on the software to make the online courses better? I just never understood that part of the company. But company didn't work. I loved a lot of the people that worked there. I moved into another startup right after that, and that startup immediately got acquired by a larger startup. And I just was like, that took me by surprise. But this larger startup raised $24 million. And, you know, I saw like a true startup with a lot of funding give it a go. And I was like, whoa. My first startup was like, you know, it didn't have like a lot of that funding to like even try. So it was running on fumes. Mm-hmm. But then this large startup, I was like, this is crazy. This is like, I just remember looking around at their office and seeing like monitors all over the place and people working really hard. But even there, I felt like there were some things that were off. So I was like, okay, communication in the startup wasn't the best. It just wasn't. It was like, what am I working on to make an impact? Like, why am I doing this? Is it really going to work? Like, people were not holding town hall meetings. You know, I think a lot of it was like a lot of funding and a lot of chaos at the same mm-hmm. a lot of chaos mm-hmm. at the same time. But I took away from that experience, like, you need good leadership. Like, there needs to be good leaders if you're going to have that amount of cash, like, you know, and
absolutely. Absolutely. And a lot of like people don't have that leadership skills. Like, maybe they were never a leader in their previous roles, and suddenly they have people to oversee. And I have like 100% faith in people that they don't have those leadership skills as long as they work on it, you know. So what do you think? Like, I mean, I've seen so many startups, like exactly what you just said. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, I don't know, wrong strategies, you know, like not like setting up a good culture because of like the lack of leadership. Yeah. So what do you think like people need to do? I don't know, like even if they are aware of that themselves, and maybe like employees don't want to say anything, maybe they notice, but they're scared to say something. I don't know like how startups can handle that.
Right.
But what are your thoughts?
That second startup also went bankrupt.
Oh my God.
So all that, the question you're asking is all that knowledge I had in my head. I'm like, what would I do if I was running it?
Yeah, that's a great question.
And that was where I said, I would do this, I would do this, I would do this, I would do this, because it didn't happen in my last startups.
Yes, especially like when you have a bad leader, you exactly want to ask yourself, like, how can I not be that?
Right.
So that's a great question you asked yourself.
I mean, startups fail all the time. I don't know if it was the leader's problem. I don't know if it was. I can't blame one person. That's the thing. It wasn't just the leaders. There was a lot of like wrong dynamics. To create that. Maybe the market wasn't the right timing and all that. But I was like, what could I do to minimize my risks of failure based off of this past experiences in that startup and in that startup? And, you know, I got let go from the second startup, and they were like letting everyone go over time. And I was thinking, okay, I got let go. What do I do? Right? And I had this knowledge in my head at this point, like working in 2 different startups, 2 data points. And I'm like, I have $50,000 that I've saved. I'm a 30-year-old guy. Do I want to buy a piece of property and get another job? Do I want to put all my money into Apple and get another job? Or do I want to try to do something and live off that $50,000 for as long as I can and try to make something of myself? Because whoever's running the ship may not do a good job again. And I might like be looking in a year or two. And I took all of those strategies and applied it to the startup that was DrChrono. So all of that like past history, and it was like painful. There was, a lot of good people that worked at these startups, and sad to see the startup just like walk away and everybody just go find something else. But, like rule number one is like find people that you can work with, right? Like, at least for me, it's like find people that you can work with that are technical. At the base level of any startup, you need like really good technical people that can code. At least this is my way of thinking. And I had a former roommate in college who was probably one of the best coders I've ever met in my life. And what I mean by that is like there were projects in school that, the professor would say, work on this for a month. And when you're done, submit it in a month, right? I remember my roommate would have it done in like 7 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, and he'd be like, I'm just going to hang out the rest of the month. And I remember like looking at him and being like, this guy is abnormally good at coding.
Is that your co-founder?
Of DrChrono.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, we started talking, and he never worked in a startup before. And I had all of the startup knowledge. But he was a good coder, like probably one of the best coders I've ever seen in my life. So I'm having conversations with him and talking about the experiences, and I couldn't verbalize everything early on, like, what the strategy would be for like building a big team, but I just kind of knew that you needed like the right ingredients for a startup, and you need a product. So if you have a co-founder who can code, product can like come from nothing almost. And I think this is part of like the great world we live in today, where you don't need $50 million to like buy servers and to put it, in a server farm. That's like $25 million right there. And then you need to hire all this like stuff, and there were no iPhones back then. But anyway, all I needed was a good co-founder, and that was like the first ingredient. And he was committed. He really just dove in with me and said, I'm going to work on this with you, which I really admired, because he kind of didn't flinch and he wanted to do it. He was really all in. And culturally, like, I wanted a good engineering culture, and like he kind of was a pillar for that. Did the other companies have that? Yes, but you need to keep it. Like, you cannot have those people just leave, so you have to like value them. And I think this is something Silicon Valley is really known for, is like value the engineers, because the people that create the product, if they're not there, the product will just kind of fall apart over time. And I see Silicon Valley like over and over, like respect the engineers and say, what are we doing? How do we do this? You need a lot of cash to stay here. You need a lot of equity to stay here. We need to respect your time. On the East Coast, it's really, at least to 1990s, early 2000s, they were kind of put in the corner. And that was just the culture. And I think my co-founder wanted to not be part of that culture in New York. And we were both in New York at the time. And we just started meeting a lot. And like, it was very consistent. And, for me, the sign that we should really do this is if he quits his job at Bloomberg, right?
So he did quit his job.
He quit his job at Bloomberg to work on this company. And that immediately put me into high gear. Like, I am responsible partly for his decision, so I have to make this work.
Were you giving him income from
No.
your
No, it was like hey,
just both.
I have some life savings, you have some life savings.
Oh, that's great.
And in my head, I was mapping out like, I can't take taxis. I'm not going to be going on vacations. There will be no fancy dinners. I need to work on weekends. Like, it was all being mapped out in my head, like what I needed to do. And he was very aligned with that. Like, that's why it worked so well, because he was like, I'm not going to take, my $50,000, his $50,000 and like go to Florida and like relax for a month. Like, his mind was like, how do we map this out to get to success? So, yeah, and in the early days, we met a lot and spoke a lot, and there was a lot of dialogue. So, like, another core ingredient of a successful startup, even from leadership down, is just communicate over and over and over. The more communication you have, I feel like a broken record, but, like, it works. And when a leader doesn't show up for 2 months, like, or if you're not communicating with, like, the people you work with, your company will like slowly fade into nothing. And I think
absolutely,
there's too much communication, but there's the right amount where I feel like people need to know what people are working on. But for that startup, we just met every day. And I remember, we took one day off a week, which was Sunday. And that was like catch-up day for me. Like, I did my laundry. I just took care of like life and that sort of thing. But, when you have $50,000, how do you make that last? I mean, this was what was in my head. And I'm like, how do I make that last? I have rent. I'm living in New York City. I could bike over to one thing that my co-founder really wanted us to have was like rented desks. So we would rent these 2 desks out in a shared office space. There was no WeWork back then. And then we would just go, sit at these desks and just kind of just like work. And no one was using our stuff. Like, people think startups are made and it's like exciting. It was just like literally sitting there for like days, nobody using stuff. And you just kind of like looking at the space and being like, okay, this doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel right, but this feels right. And you kind of just bounce around a lot. And then, the one thing I did like was the medical space, because it has a lot of meaning. So, like, we were sure of that. Like, we're going to be building software in the medical space. Like, we were both very aligned on that.
But you were not, like, had the industry expertise. Was that something new? Did you had any...
I mean, I guess
knowledge on healthcare before that?
I don't think like that. I'm like, what is the problem at hand? And like, let's just tackle it like day by day. And I call myself a turtle. It sounds so silly, but this is the way I view it. It's like a turtle can get to the ocean. It's not as fast as like a raccoon running. But if you can like consistently walk to get to where you need to be, you'll get there.
100%.
And I think a lot of people are impulsively like, oh, you don't have the skill set. I don't think like that. I'm like, what do we have to get to the destination?
Exactly.
And acquire those skills along the way.
Yeah. I think anything can be learned,
Yeah.
Especially in today's world where you can just learn things very quickly in ChatGPT helping you out.
Yes. Yeah.
But, and then you tapped into the health markets.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say tapped in. We were just like trying everything. I remember installing like Ethernet again into like a doctor's office. He's like, I need my office set up. Can you set it up for me? And I'm like, yeah, we'll do that. So we would set this one doctor up, and he had a whole office, and we would just set his computers up. But he started to use our software. Even though it wasn't perfect, he's like, I'll use it because of that.
Because you helped them out.
He didn't pay us. What's that?
No, I said, I think that's nice.
I mean,
but he didn't pay you.
But we weren't looking to get paid. I was like, what can I learn from him to help make us a better company?
That's a good view to really understand your target audience.
Yeah.
Without really at first wanting anything from them. Like, that's still,
yeah.
I mean, of course, like if you can monetize it at some point, that's the goal. But I think the focus should be just understanding your audience.
Yeah. And that for me, that was a really good experience, but that happened countless times over and over again. I remember even hearing like one doctor in Brooklyn, someone broke into his office. And, back then, like all your medical records are in the office.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it wasn't in the cloud. It wasn't secured. So like he called us and he's like, I would like to use something that's protected in the cloud.
That makes sense.
Right.
Wow.
I mean, of course it does now, but like back then, like there were a lot of break-ins because he was like in a bad area, I guess. And like, so like people were stealing laptops and desktops and like anything in the doctor's office. So like the doctor wanted cloud software. And I'm like, cloud software, check. Like for me, that was like, that can scale. Like little glimmers of like what can scale, like what would apply to all like physicians across the world, right?
Yeah.
So
and then like that turned into DrChrono.
Yeah, over time we really like made the software work for our experiences. So like it wasn't like a mapped out like here's our plan day one exactly. It kind of like grew into the product that it became, which was really nice because it was a feedback-driven product. Like it was a lot of experiences and what do you need as a doctor? I do think that there were like red flags along the way or like bad experiences that – what I mean by red flag or bad experiences, and this is what comes back to me, would this scale? Yes or no? I would talk to a doctor about one idea, would this scale? Can I use what you're telling me as a doctor and apply it to the world? Like that's the way I kept thinking about it. And like, you get some people that want something for them and just the one person.
That's an interesting question that you would go and ask your target audience to help you figure out if
I wouldn't tell them that.
Oh, you didn't?
No, I wouldn't tell them that. I wouldn't tell them, but I would just like hear them and in my head as they're talking. And I do this in my new startup. It's will this scale?
Okay.
But as they're giving me ideas and like their problem.
Or is it just a one person problem?
Right. I mean, there's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. If you can shortly tell me what DrChrono does. And then, like I mentioned earlier, how many, people using it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still it's still alive. I mean, you're no longer with it, are you?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
But it's still like live. And like the audience really wanted to know what strategies did you find that are like really effective in gaining that traction and acquiring your customers in the early stages? And at what point it was like, okay, like it's all set for gaining more and more?
Right. I mean, I don't think I used any strategy that would work in other startups. So these are all strategies Silicon Valley uses. I think a lot of them are more well known today, right? Like do things that don't scale at first, right? And ask yourself those questions like, will this scale? I think also looking towards the future. And what I mean by that is like, where will we be in 10 years? And it's hard to get out of the mindset of like, we're here today. And I'll give you like an example. Like, I don't know if you guys if you've ever been to Blockbuster Video or like Tower Records or like Virgin Records, like they were not asking the right question when they were in the thick of it, which was, what do people want today? They want CDs, they want tapes, they want VHS, they want movies on, these physical devices, and we're making money that way. If you are in the thick of it for the day-to-day, I think that's bad for like a startup. You need to think like 10 years out, like, and it's hard to do. And I think this is kind of counterintuitive, but if you're building something for the future, there's like glimmers of like the future, like, like
100%.
And I think why is Apple still relevant today? I remember the day that they removed the headphone jack. Like, people were disgusted, livid, angry. Right? Like, people couldn't believe that. How dare they remove the headphone jack?
No.
I'm going to buy an Android. Like, they were just like furious. Mm-hmm. I don't think Apple was thinking, what do we have to give our customer today? Mm-hmm. They were thinking, what does the customer want in 7 years?
That's really good. Yes. Yeah.
Right? And it's very hard to think that way. And it's very like you have a visceral reaction. Like with Netflix. Like, how dare they put the movies online? I need my DVD. Like, people had a visceral reaction. Like,
that sounds so silly when you say, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, people don't like change, but then, like, it's inevitable.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Like, forward thinking is so important.
It's really important, but it's easy to say, it's hard to do in practice. And I know Sam Altman. He's a great guy. In 2016, he was giving talks at Y Combinator about AI.
Wow.
To me, to others, saying, this is the thing we have to think about. Mm-hmm. And like, when people are thinking that far ahead, you're like, oh, of course, now it's 2023. Yes, smart guy. He was running around talking about AI in 2016. And I was like, I didn't, you're kind of processing it and you're like, he's seeing something I'm not. Let's see if it pans out. Like, but I think that's part of like what every startup has to do is like move towards the future before others do. Because if you do that and Blockbuster Video stays here and Netflix is like already in streaming, change happens so quick. Mm-hmm. And you think it's not going to happen quick, but it just happens in the flash of an eye. Like, people questioned Google, like, where's your AI? Right? It's like, oh my God, like the king of like search. Like, you see like immediate change happen so quickly. If companies, I think Google is set up to fight and to like build and to try to make something amazing. A lot of companies are not at all. And that's when you see like a company just like fall so quickly.
There was a report I was reading that, the 500 list of like the biggest companies, like there's only like a few of them that lasted. And a lot of them that are non-existent now because they couldn't keep up with the changes, which is so important for corporate to make sure they are innovative. And there's a lot of like corporate venture capital that invest in other startups or corporates that have an innovative arm. Thank you for taking us there. I think like you did great with the timing and forward thinking as well with DrChrono because like it was when first iPad came out, AWS became more mainstream. Then so your timing was perfect. That's really great that you noticed that forward thinking and how it's important, and you're still like taking it to your startup now.
I think when the iPad came out, that was a big differentiator for us because we were the very first company on the iPad.
Mm-hmm. So you were
very first. Mm-hmm. And looking back now, why wouldn't you have an iPad app? Like, but back then everyone would say, why would I have an iPad app? Mm-hmm. Like, what's the point? Like, I think there were some really good companies doing stuff there. Like Pandora and Netflix were on there so fast. Mm-hmm. It was on the iPad like the first week.
Wow.
But healthcare, a lot of the companies there are just not tech forward.
Mm-hmm. Did you have to convince your customers then that to use iPad for?
Yes and no. I think some of them immediately got it. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you think about it, it's like back then you go into a doctor's office and you remember those walls of like those yellow folders and like they'd have like, K. You'd search the Ks and to find my last name and pull out my medical record. That's just the way that it was done. But then, some doctors would be like, hey, I'm in Brooklyn. I need like to get my stuff in the cloud. And then you'd have doctors who'd say, hey, I actually want to like see my medical records at home. Others would like want to not just have one physical paper document, but they wanted like the whole staff to be able to see the patient. Right? For us, being on the iPad was a test. And I think every startup is a test machine. If you can crank out very small tests very quickly and understand which tests are successful and which ones are failures, you can like build a significant business. And when I talk about like tests, I mean running the Ethernet was a test, right? I got one doctor, he used our software. It took 8 hours of my life, but I got him. Okay, that's a test. If I build on the iPad, it's a test. How many doctors are actually going to use my software? A lot. And it wasn't intentional. It was just test. Like, and I think this is where like, you know, people think, oh, OpenAI, yes, of course they're successful. I think they're a test machine and they're very smart at it. And I think it's ingrained in that company because of Sam Altman. ChatGPT was an example test. It was a test. They just threw a test out there and then boom, it was like, oh, this is working. So, you know, you have to create a lot of fast tests and see what will help drive users to use your product. Right? And I think the iPad was a test. It just worked. And it helped us get a lot of like really good coverage and really good users like for that company. And I think it's just so apparent today that everybody has a phone in their pocket. Like everything should be in your pocket. It's so easy to say that now and like people just like agree with you. But back then it was not the case where they were like, this device is too large. It's just a big iPhone. I don't get it. If I drop it, it breaks. If a sick patient touches it, it's infected. The battery life is probably not good enough. Like, do you know if it's secure? One after, like, people would just have these like arguments, but one after one, like people would buy, an Android device or an iPhone, like one by one, right? Like, and then they're like, well, I kind of need my banking on I need this on my phone. Oh, I need all of my music on my phone. I need all of my photos on my phone. I need, all my friends on my phone. I need my social networks. It just became a thing. And it was, you have to hit those. There's something called the S curve. I don't know if you ever heard that term, but you hit this point where like there's this inflection and something becomes adopted very quickly. If you can hit the S curve at the right moment with the right product, your company takes on a life of its own. And we were testing for a long time. Like there were a lot of tests. We built a lot of stuff, but it was when you get to that right place, right time, right team, right idea, it wasn't luck. It was just tests. You become a test machine to
How
create
long
success.
did you take those tests until
2
like
years.
2 years?
We met in 2008. 2009 started building like aggressively. 2010, April 2010, the iPad comes out. But I remember thinking Steve Jobs just announced this new device. Maybe it'll work. Put it on there. Let's build it. Let's do it quick. And it was our Saturday weekend project, building on the iPad. It was a weekend project. And then iPad comes out. We launch our app immediately on the App Store. It's immediately like in the App Store. Every doctor in the United States who bought an iPad only had one medical record. So, right place, right time, right idea. And doctors were like, I'm at home. I'm excited. I got my iPad. I need medical records on my iPad. Let me download it. And it was like, oh, there it is. There's the company. Yeah. And then that was one of the many, many, many tests.
So keep testing and be forward thinking.
Yeah.
And and make sure it's like testing fast. And your customers will come, hopefully. We have reached the end of the first part of our episode. In the next segment, Danielle will share insights on developing a forward-thinking attitude, seizing opportunities at the right moment, and will offer guidance on upcoming trends in AI. He'll also provide numerous practical tips for budding entrepreneurs. Plus, for those who participated in our polls, we have a special surprise that will be revealed in the next part. Make sure to subscribe and set a reminder for next Thursday to not miss this. Remember, the Entrepreneur's Road is a community of successful founders, investors, and experts, all eager to share their secrets and support your journey to success. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn for more insights, updates, and behind-the-scenes content. Join our vibrant community across these platforms and be part of the conversation shaping the future of entrepreneurship.